Guns and Stilettos, a look into over-sexualized female video game characters. Female characters in video games are created wearing hyper-sexualized outfits with tiny waists and eroticized features for male players to control in a largely male-run industry. To start with, we have to jump back to Laura Mulvey's article regarding visual pleasure in cinema. Mulvey talks about the pleasure structure. The first, scopophilic, arises from pleasure in using another person as an object of sexual stimulation through sight. The second, developed through narcissism and the constitution of the ego, comes from the image seen. Mulvey, page 61. Basically, the viewer finds perverse pleasure in looking at the same time as identifying with characters that are also watching. Mulvey was talking about movies, but this is equally evident in video games, where the player has no choice but to identify with the playable characters or the movable camera. For example, here, the player is able to self-destruct the female playable character, who happens to be an android, in order to see her behind. Mulvey says that the women are the image and the male is the watcher who holds the power of the narrative. In video games, anyone can play them, but the video game industry is in fact largely androcentric, much like how the film industry betrayed women badly because it lacked women employees. According to studies in 2014, women made up only 22% of video game employees. To quote, "Studios value women's voices less in game development, and that this partially may manifest in the design of female characters." The video game industry started with institutionalized sexism. Women had the lowest paying jobs, and in 1989 only represented 3% of the employees. There are less female characters, and when there are female characters, they are usually sexualized. This ties into the power of the male gaze. For example, Lara Croft's large chest started as an office joke that became real because it was such a male-run industry. Lara Croft, from the 1996 and onward video game series Tomb Raider, is the most well-known female video game protagonist. She was created as an ideal quote-unquote dream woman, and while she plays a typically male role, she is still over-sexualized. As you can see in this clip, she is unmistakably feminine.
Don't you think you've seen enough?
Even the way she was advertised has an underlining sexual message. To quote, "You can move me into 2,000 different positions. Try that with your girlfriend." They even call the theme of using strong, capable female characters with sexualized bodies the quote-unquote Laura phenomenon. These female video game characters are extreme representations. As Herbst observed, female video game characters are similar in proportions to the Victorian-era tiny corset-clad waists. Herbst also points out the connection of Victorian-era and death and how the tiny waists signify constriction and pain. The dominatrix only gives the illusion of power in a sexual way instead of an empowering way, and it is still for the male players. Sometimes this dominatrix archetype is obvious.
Mad Moxie!
Miss me, sugar? Thanks for the save, doll. So, you want what's in the vault, and given how tragically long it's been since I ran my own fighting ring, I want Torg's Coliseum for myself.
Moxie from Borderlands and Bayonetta are perfect examples of this dominatrix archetype. Women are supposed to ignore the fact the characters are created to appeal to men. Because these characters are dominating and occupying typically male jobs, it can be mistaken for an image of feminism. But it is not. The male fantasy does not match up with what women actually want. Also, because the video game industry is so largely male run, the video game community is also male dominated. Women are less likely to want to play sexualized characters and are harassed by men in the community. The objectified female characters make it easier for men to partake in this harassment. For example, there is an actual attempted rape scene against the Metal Gear Solid character Quiet, an objectified female character that barely wears anything because of plot excuse. One last example, which is talked about less in the discourse around female video game characters, is Japanese mobile games. Japan currently makes up a large part of the video game culture. This is brought up because in these Japanese mobile games, one can collect women like one would collect baseball cards. Usually, the women are wearing objectified outfits and sometimes move on the screen with obvious jiggle. Some of these phone games, you can even poke the girls and watch their embarrassed or flirty reactions. This is the perfect example of scopophilia. Continue to think about the fact that female video game characters are created for men in an androcentric industry and community. Moving forward, there needs to be more female game designers and more games geared not just towards women, but people of all gender and sexuality. The fetishized dominatrix stereotype needs to put its whip away.